Tom, I just wanted to play this and get your take on this. So Dominic Anglade was on earlier today here on CJD, and we've had Eric Duhem on before. And then over the weekend, and I saw this clip, and I thought, for everything that's going on right now, Francois Legault with that insult over the weekend, of course, telling Anglophones here that basically he understands why we're here, and it's for the festivals and the fun. And then I hear what Eric Duhem had to say about Quebec and about Montreal. And I know we've talked about the Conservatives who are maybe getting a little strength provincially, but listen to this and give me your reaction, Brian.
I do believe that in Quebec in 2022, everybody knows that the common language is French. Everybody accepts that. Anglophones have never been as bilingual as they are today. So we have to stop those old feuds and that old paradigm, one against each other. We have to unite together. We have to see the fact that Montreal is one of the most bilingual cities in the world, in America at least. We have to see that as a richness, as something positive. Stop thinking it's a weakness and a reason to fight between each other.
I'm trying to understand what in there is objectionable. It sounds to me like that's exactly the message certainly Anglophones want to hear. Why aren't we hearing it from the Liberals?
Well, geez, I just listened to the clip of Dominic Anglade on the news, and I thought it was refreshing to hear her say clearly that she would get rid of the quota system with regard to people who are allowed to attend English CEGEP and get rid of the notwithstanding clause. So I think that's quite substantive. With regard to what we just heard from Mr. Duhem, it's the expression of a wish, but it's almost as if, don't worry, be happy. But he doesn't make any reference to the fact that Bill 96, for example, allows the language cops into any business with 25 employees or more to do whatever they want, in terms of seizing your computers and whatnot. He doesn't talk about the fact that Bill 21 overtly attacks religious minorities. So it's very nice to have that smiley attitude, everybody should just be friends. But at the same time, there are really substantive parts of Bill 96 that are very offensive to the English-speaking community of Quebec. And I've been following Duhem carefully, so I know he's been on the show any number of times. And I always find him very, very capable of sending a positive sounding message. But when you scratch away at it, there's not much there. And it's the same thing here, Don't worry, be happy. Anglophones are very bilingual. And yeah, okay, but have you looked at what's in Bill 96? Do you actually know what's in there? That the equality of English and French before the courts is being taken away, and it's something that's guaranteed by the Constitution. What would you do about that, Mr. Duhem? And whenever you try to get specific with Duhem, you get something general like we just heard. So frankly, between Anglade saying something specific, I'll get rid of the quotas for attending English CEGEP and get rid of the notwithstanding clause, and the type of sentiment we heard from Duhem, I know which one carries more weight.
Well, you're right, except the thing is, he's saying what so many people need to hear right now. And because of that, it's working. And Anglade, it's not that she's not saying what we want to hear, but like you said, she's more on the technical side of things, whereas right now people are having a very emotional reaction.
Very smart observation, and I couldn't agree with you more, Natasha, because it's very hard to be rational and emotional at the same time. Mm-hmm. You're right. And that's why Duhem is where he is in the polls. I mean, he's behind the Liberals, but not by much, because he has this great way of talking to people and saying things, with regard to the feeling that they might want to hear. But again, if you look at the substance of the two statements, there's only one that has something in it for the English-speaking community of Quebec, and that's what Dominic Anglade said.
Okay, so let's move on from that to this report that we talked about at the beginning of the show, commissioned by the government and then kept hidden, found out in an information or access to information request. The government knows this idea of 6 months to learn the French language is simply not feasible, yet they choose to do nothing about it.
Exactly. So this is scandalous that they would have information that would have contradicted one of the key provisions of Bill 96, which is, of course, unless you're a historic Anglo, and I'm still waiting to get my historic Anglo badge, although I do have my Aaron Rand historic Anglo T-shirt still. I can't believe that we're still having this discussion. They're going to continue to push this through and say that once you've arrived here, you're going to be, if you're trying to speak English, they'll say, sorry, is that an Australian accent I hear? How long have you been here? 7 months? Oh, mais je m'excuse, je peux rien faire. I mean, this is bonkers. You can just imagine, what's the doctor supposed to do? Really quiz you? I mean, as you come into his office, what are they going to do to hire people in the institutions? Maybe one of the reasons why they're canceling the expansion of Dawson to train new healthcare professionals is that they just don't think we need that anymore, because they're going to make it almost impossible to access health and social services in English after a few years, because you won't be able to hire and require a knowledge of English as you now can. And by the way, that's another thing where I think that Anglade has been very specific, saying that she would, of course, proceed with the expansion of Dawson College that Legault has canceled.
I was just thinking about the question that we were asking earlier today, just about, you know, that the CAQ commissioned this study, right? And they know that it's unrealistic for new arrivals to learn French, to master French.
It's scandalous, Natasha. Yeah. It's absolutely scandalous that they know, they have a scientific study proving that what they're requiring of new arrivals makes no sense. It's impossible to pick up enough French in 6 months when you're going through everything else. And if you have English, which is one of the languages that you've been allowed to use up until now in accessing health and social services, for example, or dealing with the government otherwise, but to take that away after only 6 months makes no sense. So this is a sign, you know, there's a principle in the Quebec civil law that good faith is presumed. You know, it's written down in the civil code. It's a very nice reference to civic-minded behavior. You know, you've got to presume that people are of good faith. But when you have something like this, you have definitive proof that the CAQ government is in bad faith when it's dealing with these language issues. And by the way, I would add this bizarre interview that Simon Jeanin Barrette, the language czar, gave over the weekend, where he starts openly musing about getting rid of the Canadian Charter altogether, so that we can better protect collective rights and stop worrying about this nonsense about individual rights, like, you know, freedom of speech, freedom of association, freedom of religion. Forget about that stuff. The only reason the Charter should exist is to protect the collective rights, and that's why he would get rid of any reference to the Canadian Charter by simply notwithstanding everything from now on. How François Legault has been able to get through the day today without having to really answer that
but that's the thing. Nothing seems to stick. Like, I mean, when I was reading about this and we asked for our listeners' response to it, and people are like, how is it possible that they commissioned this report? They know that it doesn't work, and yet they decide to plow ahead, and yet it doesn't seem to hurt them. How does it not hurt the CAQ?
Well, because it's going to be a 4-month campaign. That's, 3.5 of months anyway, between now and October 3rd. And I think that it's going to take some time for this stuff to sink in. And it depends how well, for example, Anglade does in starting to chip away at this stuff. Is she able to bring the case to the wider Quebec public? Because one of the things I know, for having lived here my whole life, is that there's so much goodwill amongst Quebecers of all backgrounds and language groups and so forth, that if people start to understand that this is a real attack on the English-speaking community of Quebec and of the ability of that community to remain vibrant. And I was listening to the very distressing series of calls you were getting from people who are, Russ Copeman channeled that a few weeks ago, saying, look, in my whole life, I've never once considered leaving Quebec, but for the first time, I'm sort of going, what's there to say for it? I think that we should stay stoic, realize that this is a part of a context, not a representation of what the average Quebecer thinks about the English-speaking community, or frankly, about how you view minority rights generally. But right now, we've got a premier who's extremely popular personally. He's got this Sorcerer's Apprentice minister, remember that from Walt Disney, where he just picks up the robes of the wizard and all hell breaks loose, and that's where we are right now. And yet Legault is playing the game because he loves the distraction that is caused by Simon Jeanin Barrette, because he doesn't have to answer, as you correctly say, Natasha, about anything else.
No, Tom, we're out of time. I just have one thing. I know we brought this up before. So you point out all these things, this latest report that's just been uncovered showing that they know that you can't learn French in 6 months, their own study that they commissioned. When does the federal government start pushing back?
Well, I guess as soon as David Lametti provides you with that legal opinion he promised you that says that the Quebec government can change the BNI Act unilaterally while at the same time removing equality of English and French before the courts. And, in the newscast, we were there, fumbling around saying, well, Trudeau says that if it ever makes it to the Supreme Court, then perhaps they'll intervene. He can send the thing to the Supreme Court tomorrow morning and stop all the stalling and everything else that we've been going through, but he won't do it simply because he's too afraid to take on François Legault. And their own language legislation that they had in the House, all of a sudden the CAQ is writing in letters, Sonia Lebel saying, here are the 14 things that have to be changed in this proposed federal law on official languages across Canada. And I'm very anxious to see what Madame Petitpas-Taylor, the minister responsible, decides to do with that. So far, it looks like the thing's going to get jammed. I doubt that it's going to make it through by the end of this session.
All right. Tom Mulcair. Thank you, Tom.